And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Looking at tonight's weather, we've got the next system here. A little pressure hanging back to the west again, with the front, though, being driven eastward by a pretty good upper-level jet. So that's going to be spreading wind and precipitation into the central Aleutians. Otherwise, lingering snow showers here over the central and northern Bering Sea. And a little bit more widespread up here, areas of light snow with that low center over the Seward Peninsula, drying out over the interior, drying out over the Panhandle. And that continues into tomorrow, though a chance of rain here over the southern southeast coast with that system farther to the south. Another weak trough, chance of some snow showers, North Gulf Coast into the Matanuska Valley, maybe northern Cook Inlet, eastern Kenai Peninsula. Dry, light winds over the interior, and more wind and precipitation coming into the Alaska Peninsula up to the Pribilof Islands, not quite making it to St. Lawrence Island. And then Tuesday, whatever does hit St. Lawrence Island will get pushed off to the southwest there with kind of a weak easterly flow here, east-northeast flow, but the central southern Bering Sea, several lows there, keeping it breezy and unsettled with widespread clouds, showers, light snow, light rain, mixture of precipitation, and another low pressure area here bringing more rain or snow up to the North Gulf Coast with something of an increase in the winds, but nothing too great. And for the coastal water forecast here, on the south coast, northeast winds 20 knots, east winds 10 to 15 knots for the north coast, Lynn Canal north winds at 20 knots, north at 20 also for Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait. And the outlook for Tuesday, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, north winds at 10 knots, north at 15 for Clarence Strait, and for the south coast, north winds at 20 knots, central and north coast, east-southeast winds 20 knots, seas 8 to 9 feet. And for Prince William Sound, Monday, east winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet, variable winds 10 to 15 knots for the North Gulf Coast. Northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, and Cook Inlet north winds 10 to 15 knots. Outlook for Tuesday, big increase in the winds here for Cook Inlet, especially south of the Forelands. Full gales, northeast 45 knots, seas up to 12 feet. Northern Cook Inlet, north winds at 30 knots. And Kamishak Bay, northeast winds 45 knots, southeast at 40 for the Barren Islands. Gale warnings here for all of the North Gulf Coast. East-southeast 35 knots, and Prince William Sound, east winds 30 knots, seas 7 feet. Kodiak Island for Monday, north winds 15 to 20 knots, light easterlies at 10 knots with 4-foot seas for Bristol Bay. The Alaska Peninsula, south to southeast winds 25 to 35 knots. And then for the day on Tuesday, for the Alaska Peninsula, southwest or west-southwest at 30 knots there, south at 25 for Bristol Bay. Gale warnings for Kodiak Island, east to south winds 35 to 40 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, gale warnings there for sure with south to southeast winds 35 to 40 knots, southwest winds 25 knots for Adak and Atka, and southwest at 30 knots for the western Aleutians with seas out here 20 to 24 feet. And then for the day Tuesday, from Kiska to Shimia, northwest winds 35 knots. And then for the central and west central Aleutians, west-southwest 25 to 35 knots, and the eastern Aleutians, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. And for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island here on down toward Cape Newenham, southeast winds 25 knots, southeast 30-knot winds forecast for the Pribilofs. St. Matthew Island, east at 35 knots, northeast 15 for the Yukon Delta coast, east 15 for St. Lawrence Island, and southeast 15 for Norton Sound. And then for the day Tuesday, here for, again, the Kuskokwim Delta coast, east winds 25 knots, southwest at 20 for the Pribilofs with 11-foot seas. St. Matthew Island, stronger northeast winds there at 30 knots, extending up to the Yukon Delta coast. Northeast winds 25 knots for St. Lawrence Island and 20 knots for Norton Sound. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, kind of a light variable wind pattern there tomorrow with Monday looking at east winds at 10 knots for the central coast. Western Arctic coast, about the same, east winds 15 knots. Chukchi Sea, east to southeast, 15 to 20 knots. And for the day on Tuesday for the Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, east at 15 on the western Arctic coast. For the central and east side, east winds at 10 knots.